Hello, and welcome to the practical portion of the Intro to Illustrator workshop at CTE Summer Conference 2022. My name is Emily Scales. I am one of the instructors of the course, along with on the team for creating the Adobe Visual Design curriculum. I have 15 years of graphic design teaching experience, first as a digital media teacher and now as an Adobe teacher. I am in Wake County at Wakefield High School in Raleigh, North Carolina. Before we kind of dig into the practical things that I've created for you to work through, I did want to give a little overview of Illustrator itself and where you find things and somewhat of the interface. I'm hopeful that most of you have seen Illustrator before and maybe you just kind of weren't sure where to dig in, and this will give you a nice introduction. This is the new document panel. One of the things I really love about Adobe is it provides you with a lot of custom templates, and you can also save templates, which I'm horrible about, of course. But you have different print things along with templates. On the right-hand side is going to be where you're going to start a new file. You can change this over from pixels to inches to picas to feet, whatever kind of works best for you. I personally prefer inches or pixels. You can name the file here. You can set up a bleed area, which is going to be runoff, if you will, if you plan on having something printed. You have your color choice, your raster effects, things like that, along with if you go to more settings, you can have a lot more templates and artboard information and things like that. I do like to set up my artboards starting orientation wise and how many I'm going to need. I'm going to just create a basic letter size template just to kind of show you some of the basics of Adobe Illustrator's interface. One of the things that can be awesome about Adobe and sometimes frustrating is the updates happen quite often. I am working in Adobe Illustrator 2021. I work in this version because this is the version my students certify in. As the certifications roll forward, I roll my software forward. If you are in a lab that manages your own updates like I do, I'm in a Mac lab, I keep an eye on this very carefully. If you are in a county where your IT rolls your software, you might want to develop a good relationship with them in order to ensure you have the correct version of the software. There's no point in learning a newer version if the students are going to be testing in an older version. On the right, on the left here, you're going to see the toolbar. When you're using an Illustrator toolbar, it's important to note that unlike any other software, there are two different types of toolbars. There's the advanced toolbar and the basic toolbar. I automatically switch mine to the advanced toolbar because there's a lot of tools that I particularly love and use often that are not available on the basic toolbar. I think it's also important to get your students used to an advanced toolbar because this is, again, what's on the certification exam. The little arrow in the corner is going to indicate that there are more choices. You can get to that by pressing and holding or simply right-clicking, depending on your preferences. You have your fill and your stroke here at the bottom, along with your gradient, your solid color, and your no for the defaults. And then you have some draw modes, and then you have your screen modes at the bottom. Across the top is your options bar. This is going to change based on the tool you have selected. So for example, I have the text tool right now, so you'll see character and paragraph styles, things like that. If I were to switch to a paintbrush or a drawing tool, you're going to see that things slowly start to shift as I click and move and change to different tools. There are tabs across the top. This only goes as far as there's usually space. I'm on a smaller computer, so I have less room. But if you're on a larger 21.5 or 27-inch monitor, you'll have a lot of space for tabs. Be careful though, the larger the document, the larger the file size, and that is going to slow the program down. So if you have too much open, you're going to start seeing lag. On the right here are some of my default panels that can be housed, that can be found and pulled up through the window menu. This is, again, a menu that you are going to use quite often. You want the students to get very comfortable going here to look for the panels that they need. Illustrator is heavily panel driven, so you want to make sure that you are aware of that. My default is always going to be the properties panel. I keep this up pretty much all the time along with my artboard and my layer panel. And then I have some collapse panels here. I have saved my own workspace, so Scales' workspace, so that it gives me exactly what I like to use. This is easy enough to do by just creating a new workspace, and then you can reset your workspace at any time. So I just did, and I had a couple of panels missing. All right. One of the other big tools that I think it's important to master that we do not have an activity for today, though there are activities available on my website, on Adobe, Help Exchange, things like that, is the Artboard tool. When you choose this tool, your properties panel does adjust where you can add artboards, you can change the orientation of those artboards, name them, you can rearrange them as you want to. This is just a good one to have in your arsenal pretty quickly, in my opinion, because I do not personally use one file and one artboard if I'm working on something. If I'm working on a larger file and I know I'm going to have multiple pieces, I will run as many artboards as I need out of that one file. That is a personal preference for me. I just think it's a more efficient way to work, and it's one that the certification really prefers for the students to use. So it's a good way to start getting them to practice that early on. When I teach activities, I tend to model that behavior with my students, that habit with my students. And what I've given you for today also models that behavior. So if you'll look at the file that I've given you, and I'm going to shut this one down, don't save. I've given you a 6 artboard worksheet, if you will. That's what I call them when I work on these with my students. Some of these are something similar to what I create for my students, and I've pulled out some of what I think is the most valuable tools. This is not everything I teach. And then I've changed some stuff around just for you all. This is not everything I teach, of course. I will say Illustrator is my love of my life for the most part when it comes to software. So I have a lot of activities built around Illustrator. On my website, which is whsdigitalmedia.weebly.com, I post everything, even though I use Google Classroom and Canvas for my students now. I still post everything for you all so that you can download my worksheets. These have been a labor of love. I have a lot of them. I would say it's probably for Illustrator alone 40 to 50 different activities. You can't do them all. You don't want to do them all, but they are readily available. For example, my pen tool worksheet is an extra 3 pages, I think. And same with a lot, like some of these, the curvature pen tool is another couple of pages as well. But we're going to go ahead and dive in. The pen tool, or P on your keyboard, is to me the pinnacle tool for getting started in using Adobe Illustrator. When we're talking about the pen tool, there are tools that are associated with it. And again, if you are on the basic toolbar, you will not get things like the anchor point tool. So you want to be on that advanced toolbar, especially when working with the pen tool. Up here, I've kind of given you a little screenshot of the different tools. I've also kind of said it's a great way to start by changing your appearance panel, which is here to the right, to have no fill, which is this white with a red kind of stripe for across it. And then I always like to turn my stroke up. I said 3, you can do 3, 6, 12. It's whatever you want is completely up to you. And then I like to choose a color that is easily visible. So as I'm working and demonstrating for my students, they can see. One of the other things I really like to stress as I use the pen tool and teach the pen tool is paying attention to the pen tool behavior signs. A lot of the tools have behavior signs that are very similar to these. So in my opinion, once you recognize them in the pen tool and you make that a part of your foundational knowledge, it will translate to other tools. So I put this little guide up here for you just to kind of give you an idea of what each one does. If you'll see, I've got my pen tool here and it's got the little asterisk in the corner, and that says that I would be starting a new path. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I always make sure I start with the pen tool. There are easier ways to draw a star for sure than doing it with the pen tool, but I think it's important for the students to master this so that as they grow, they are comfortable using all aspects of the pen tool. If you'll see, I've given you some directions here at the top, which kind of goes through. You have blue dots, red dots, and green dots. We're going to start with the blue dots. As simple as this sounds, all we're going to do is click here. If you played Connect the Dots as a kid, you can totally do this worksheet. So I'm just literally going to follow this around. If you watch, you'll see that that asterisk next to my pin is now gone due to the fact that I'm in the middle of a pinned path. This is right now an open path because it is not a solid shape. It is still considered a line. However, when I get back onto the top anchor point, you'll see that pen tool behavior now has a circle next to it. That tells me I'm going to create a closed path, and it goes away because I have completed my path. This is now a shape that is completely fillable. It is completely movable, and I have able to complete that with this pen tool. That's basic. That's just click, click, click. We're going to add a little extra steps, and just follow along with me if you want, or watch all the way through and then kind of go back. For this one, again, I'm going to go back, P for pen tool. There's that starting pin tool behavior sign, and I'm gonna follow this down. I'm not holding anything down yet because I wanna follow this angle, but this is gonna be a straight angle. So if you look, it says hold down shift key going into number 3. That's gonna put me at a perfectly 45-degree angle, whatever direction I have. So as I go to the 3, that's gonna get me a perfectly straight line. But if you'll notice, I no longer line up with 4 because 4 does not follow at a 40-degree angle, so I'm gonna let that go. This is one of those, as I work, my finger is almost always hovering over a couple of different keys on my keyboard, and the shift is one. So once I get here, all of these are on a 45, so I can just hold that down. I don't need to release, which is quite nice. And I'm gonna go all the way around. The goal is to make this tree a complete shape. And I just messed up. I forgot to hold down the shift, so my angle wasn't straight. So I just Command Z or Control Z if you're on a Windows to undo what I just did. That is the same structure as it is in every other program, is Command Z. Command Y, however, is not redo. Be careful, Command Y gets you into outline mode. You will have a student that will do this almost daily until they learn not to. Command Shift Z or Control Shift Z is step backwards or redo. All right, so now let's talk about curved lines. And we're going to add a new color here into our directions. We're going to add a red dot. So what the red dot means is when we click, we're not going to release. I'm going to hold down and I'm going to pull these things out called handles. A handle is the indicator of the angle and the depth of what my smooth, curved line is going to be. So I always tell my students we're going to click and pull. Click and pull. Sometimes they struggle with this hand motion. So one of the things that I've had to do over the years is I've had to show them my finger movements on a mouse holding it up. I've had to go and demonstrate it in front of them, or I've had to physically say, okay, I'm going to do it. I want you to watch my finger, or even have them put their hand over my hand to feel the motion of what I'm doing. It's a subtle visual thing that they don't always grasp, and they'll do this, and I'll show you what they'll do. They'll click and then they'll click up here, and they don't understand why theirs doesn't look perfectly round. So I'm going to undo that and go back. And then I'm going to start here. If you see that I've got my completer sign and I can click and drag out. This always gets students frustrated. See that? Where it's going to pull that curve. If you get up here and you hold the Option key down, it's not going to bother the other handle that we did on steps 1 and 2. So that's a really good one, is to hold down the Option key, click and press and hold down the Option key. I don't have it where it says 9, pull to 10, because I feel like that gets really confusing. So I just kind of show them that as I go. All right. Let's go ahead and try this one as well. It's a similar motion that we just did, except for this time we're not going to be making a closed shape. We're going to be making an open path, or a fancy word for a line. On number 1, I'm going to hold down Shift while I click and drag to 2. What this is going to do is, just like keeping a straight line, it's going to keep my handle straight as well. It's going to help ensure that I create a straight and even curve as I go down. So I'm going to go 5, hold down my Shift key, and then I'm going to drag out to 6 and release. Zoom out so you guys can see. 7, hold down that Shift key. I'm going to drag out to 8 and release. And then 9, Shift, drag out to 10. Okay. Now here's the issue. If you'll see that I still have my line is going, these are my smart guides. In order to get out of this open path and create a line, we're just going to hit Escape on our keyboard. Now we have a little fancy curved line. Here's a different type of curved line, because I want to show you how when we pull a line, and I'll do this really quick, the handles go balanced here. But if I want to have my curve go in this same direction, that doesn't work. So what I have to do is I actually have to change the direction of my handle. So I'm going to start at 1 and I'm going to hold down Shift and drag out to 2. I'm going to go to 3 and drag out to 4. Now you can release, but I personally like to teach my students just to stay holding on. They're going to get their Alt or their Option key, and then I call this folding. They're going to fold their handle or drag their handle to the green dot. Then they're going to release. I kind of do magic fingers at this point, and I show them that I've let go so that they can fully understand what those hand motions are. So again, 8. I'm going to go 6, drag to 7. I'm going to hold down my Option key. I do have to release my Shift. If you hold down the Shift, you don't have to release if you're going back to an even place, but it's just something to be aware. If this gets off, no big deal. We're practicing the motions. And that's what I tell my students all the time. I'm like, are we practicing? They're like, yep. I'm like, do I care if it's perfect? They're like, nope. I was like, I do not care if it's perfect as long as you get the hand motions down. So again, 12, drag to 13, holding down that Shift key. I'm going to grab my Option key and I'm going to fold that handle down. 15, drag out to 16. And then to get out of this, we're going to hit Escape. Now, the nice thing about this video is if I went too fast for you, which I fully understand if I did, you can always back it up and watch it again. I also have a lot longer video about using the pen tool on my YouTube channel, Emily K. Scales, which you should definitely check out. All right, so that's the pen tool. Let's move on to the curvature pen tool. The curvature pen tool is a tool that I like to use. It is a newer tool, but I like to use it for more quick activities, more simplistic design. If I'm doing something very complicated, I'm not going to use the curvature pen tool. I'm going to go and use my pen tool, but this is a great one for helping students master. This one's keyboard shortcut is Shift with the back hyphen, which is next to the number 1 key, which isn't quite as comfortable for using as just a P for a pen tool, but I'm assuming C was taken, or it is taken. I know it's taken. So it is that Shift with the back little accent mark. Again, this is a newer tool. I think this came out in like 2018 or 2019, so it's not that old. But let's get into it. So again, I'm going to leave my fill and my stroke kind of the way I had it there before. If you'll see, I'm accidentally connected down here. So if that happens, just kind of hit Escape multiple times until you get out of it and then click off of that pen tool object that we just created and go back to it. So we're going to start it here. This one literally I created so it follows the path of the. All right, so this is one of those things that always gets students is you click and then they click up here and it's a straight line and they don't understand. What I tell them is to keep going, is that this is a type of tool that adjusts as you go. So you kind of have to let it do its thing. And what I tell them is I tell them to find kind of that place, and you'll see it's going to keep changing, where you think that the anchor point should go for a curve. So if you see this one, we don't have to make any changes to because the pen tool literally just adjusted to the curve beautifully. This one, however, is not going to. So I'm going to click here and I'm going to click up here and you're like, oh, it's perfect. It lined up perfectly. Uh-oh, no, it doesn't. So in order to make this not a smooth curve, we're going to double click there to get a straight curve. And then as we go, if I know that needs to be a straight, I'm going to click twice to get a straight anchor or a corner point, excuse me. And I'm going to click once to get a curve. So I'm just going to follow this. And if you forget, which I'm going to do that, I'm going to forget just for you. I'm going to show you how we fix it. So it's as simple as this. If you forget, all you need to do is go back with the curvature pen tool still selected and just double click on that point or points that you missed. I kind of like to go back if as weird as that sounds, because that's just the way my brain works. I just click and I find the little places that I would want to put an anchor point and then I adjust them later. So we'll do this one here just so you can see the way this one works. And I'm double clicking where those straight kind of curves are. Click, 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 click. So it's very speedy, in my opinion. It does speed up your process quite a bit, depending on what your preferred style is. I will say I'm debating about starting this one with my students, just because I feel like they may be able to better understand how to use this one a little bit more. And then this is one where I'm like, oh, I missed that one. Okay, well, that didn't quite work out the way I wanted to. So here's what I'm doing. I'm with my curvature pen tool. All I'm doing is just pulling and adjusting the placement of those anchor points, which is kind of nice that you don't even have to switch tools. You can just dig right in. And then again, if it's not quite what you want, I can click on that line. If you watch what I did right there, I just clicked and added another line, and then I can adjust that independently So that's kind of a nice ability. It lets you kind of hyper correct as you go, which I can be a bit of a perfectionist when it comes to my drawing. So being able to stick on one tool and adjust on one tool as I go is kind of nice to me. So again, I think that's a personal preference, but then I can get it as close to it as I want to. I'm going to leave you on this one to try this one independently. Hopefully, you've kind of seen how this one works. And we're going to go on to drawing some basic shapes. I would stop and save right now just so in case you lose it, you are good to go. Save or save as, depending on what file structure you are. While we use the pen tool in order to help master fundamental skills, it is important to note that there's no reason to reinvent the wheel by drawing some basic shapes. So we're going to get into some basics real quick, and I'm going to show you the foundations of how to use these different tools. We have the rectangle tool, the rounded rectangle tool, which is a newer addition that replaced the line segment tool, ellipse, polygon, star, and the flare tool, which is also somewhat of a newer tool. I don't have anything in here about the flare tool. You can play with it if you'd like to. I've never found a lot of use for it, so I'm kind of genuinely surprised by its addition. With any of these tools, whether it be the rectangle or the circle or the ellipse, excuse me, tool, when you use these, if you simply pull a box, it's going to be unconstrained. If you hold down the shift key, however, it is going to stay constrained. So when you're using these tools, that's one of those important things I like to teach my students in Illustrator, that when you're using something like the rectangle, the circle, anything like that, if I'm resizing anything and I want to keep things constrained, I make sure I hold down the shift key. That's just a good habit to get them into. So if you just want to practice kind of pulling some shapes here, I think that's really a great use of your, it's quick, it's easy, and you can kind of see how simple it is to use. The bottom row, however, does have some different changes. So I want to make sure that you understand how to manipulate polygons, stars, and then how to change a few things, like we're going to draw a little Pac-Man. So with the polygon, if you just click and pull, it's going to pull whatever was the last polygon shape you used, or it's going to default to, I believe it's 5-sided. However, if you click one time, it's going to pull up your dialog box. So at this point, I can change to an 8-sided polygon figure, and it's going to change my shape. Keep in mind, you can go pretty much as hard as you want to with this. So if you do 30, it's going to do 30 sides. The more sides you get, though, the closer it's going to look to a circle. The polygon is going to default also to whatever size is set right here on the radius. So that's something to kind of be aware of. With the star tool, it works essentially the same way, except for you have now 2 radiuses to work with instead of 1 radius. So when I pull this star, it's going to kind of default that traditional star shape. However, if I wanted something maybe more pointy, I change this to 40 of a radius and 20 for radius 2. You're going to slowly see kind of subtler shifts, if you will. The more difference in that radius, the more extreme it becomes. So we'll do 90. There you go. So you can see that that's a dramatically different proportion. This one's really neat. When I was taught to make something like a Pac-Man, I was taught to draw a circle, create a triangle, and then cut out that triangle from the circle. However, one of the things that Illustrator is constantly doing is changing and adjusting. Anything that is underlined in the program will pull up additional objects. So for example, when I click shape, I have some other things, and I can now create a Pac-Man. So I can cut a piece out. Now there's defaults here, but I could type in if I wanted 40, for example. So for this, I've said to put in 60, and this is just to kind of show you some choices. You can change whether it's the pie or the cutout. You can change the angle of where that's located, which is pretty neat. So that's one of those work smarter, in my opinion, not harder. As you're drawing basic shapes, of course, they're going to default a very specific way, and I want to go through how to make some adjustments and how to make some changes. This is also just other fun ways to draw shapes. So I'm going to start with my rectangle tool. That is the keyboard is M on your keyboard, by the way. And again, I'm holding down shift while I'm doing it. Let's get out of black. Black's boring. There we go. Blue with, I'm going to take no stroke. Okay. So we're going to use some of our pen tools. We're going to use the delete anchor point because I want to show you that on any object, whether it's the pen tool or whether it's the shapes tool, I can remove any point here. So I can click and remove this one. I can remove this one. It's really up to me kind of which one I want to do. Then I can go back to my selection tool, which is V on my keyboard, and I'm going to hold down my shift key and I'm just going to rotate. The shift key allows us to move again in that 45-degree angle. So I tend to use that pretty significantly. If you want it to fit in the box, again, I'm just holding down shift and just pulling in that corner to shift the size down. Next, we're going to draw a little strawberry. I'm going to start with my ellipse tool. And what I want you to see on this one is that just because it's a round shape doesn't mean it has to stay rounded. So I want to adjust a single anchor point. We talked about this when we were talking about the pen tool is using the anchor point tool, which is, I'm sorry, the direct select tool, direct select, which is A on my keyboard. I'm going to click one point. And now I can pull that one point down. I can also flatten that point. I can change the handles on that individual point. But what this allows us to do is take a very simple shape that the program gives us and manipulate that shape without having to draw a more complicated shape. If you want the little green icons, I'll show you really quickly how we do that, or the little leaves, if you will. I draw one circle. I'm going to change it to a green shade. I'm going to go with my selection tool and kind of place it where I want to. This is one I use all the time. Option key, if you click on an object, you'll see that my mouse changes to 2. That allows me to pull a copy, and I just simply release between the pulls, if you see, and it'll let me make as many copies as I want to. I'm going to take these 3 and I'm going to group them right here. Group. Mine's going over there for some reason. I don't know why. I haven't taken the time to figure it out, which is also Command G or Control G on your keyboard. And then I can grab the red part of my strawberry, arrange, and bring to front. This is directly involved with what's called stacking order. This is kind of a fundamental process of any Adobe program, is the ability to change the order of how they appear in your layers. So if you'll see, if I move these below in my layers panel versus move them above, you can do it from the layers panel. I do have an activity that's dedicated to just exploring the layers, or you can right click and do the arrange front back, or you can go to the select, I'm sorry, you can go to, I never remember where this is. Is it under arrange? I always right click. I apologize. That's probably something I should be better about. Oh, object, duh. Bring to front, bring to back, all of that. All right, that is our basic shapes. Again, I have an activity dedicated to basic shapes, which is a lot more in depth. It's on my website, whsdigitalmedia.weebly.com. I also have a video about that. Feel free to subscribe to me on YouTube. Let's try this, and then we're going to move on to the next piece. One of the most basic panels that I think students should learn very early on is using the Pathfinder and the Align panels. If you'll notice, I have mine right here, Align, Pathfinder. When you open one, the other one opens automatically, which should tell you that they're pretty closely related, in my opinion, and used together quite often. Again, I'm a big believer in do not work harder than you need to work. I think moving this and trying to get this arranged the way I want it is just a waste of my time when the program does it for me. So for this, what we're going to do is we're going to kind of follow along. I'm going to select both of my pieces here. We're going to make one donut, but we're going to do one piece together at first. So I'm going to start with my blue and my yellow, and I'm going to select both. I'm going to click one time again with nothing else being held down, not my shift key, not my control key, and I'm going to make my yellow circle my key object. What that's going to do is that's going to make everything move around that object. So whether it's 1 or 2 like I've got here, or whether it's 60, it doesn't matter as long as you have one key object selected. You don't have to use a key object. It'll still do the job. And I'll show you, I'm going to center and center. But if you notice, my donut, my yellow part moved as well. When I make this a key object and I do it again, you should notice just the blue is now moving in relation to the yellow. I'm going to do this again on the pink. I'm going to make my pink my key object, and you can always tell it's key because it's slightly darker. And I'm going to center and center again. The Pathfinder panel, and I've circled the ones that, by the way, that you need to click here. We have all these different modes. So right now we're going to start with this one, which is minus front. Whatever's in the front is going to remove from whatever is selected in the back. And basically it just punches a hole. It's not like it went white. It just punched a hole. And I'm going to do that again. Now I can take my pink donut here and I can put it on top or below in this case. And then I'm going to right click and I'm going to arrange and bring that one to front. So we get a little cutie patootie. I like to think of these as Homer Simpson donuts. And we have a beautiful little donut. For our football, again, this is one of those shapes. If I need to use that football shape, I don't believe in drawing it if I can just draw 2 circles and cut them out from each other, which is what we're going to do. First, I'm going to align to top to get that even. And then all I'm going to do is click up on my Pathfinder panel and go to this one, which is called intersect. It's just going to leave behind whatever overlaps like an intersect. And now I have a football and cat eye, any kind of thing I want, which is very convenient when drawing other more complicated shapes, petals on a flower, for example. With my bow tie, I'm going to start by getting these centered. And if you'll notice, they aren't quite overlapping. So I'm going to rearrange these first. And then I'm going to center again. And I'm going to go ahead and go back to my Pathfinder and I'm going to merge. Now, one of the things I want you to know, when we merge, whatever color is on top, and I did these 3 different colors on purpose to show you that that's going to be the color the entire object becomes. So if my green, this dark green, was on top and I did it again, my bow tie is going to become dark green. It will not maintain the original colors that the shapes were. So just kind of keep that in mind as you're creating. If you want to create a bow tie and you want to maintain those colors, you would group this instead of uniting under the Pathfinder menu. So just fun little things. And then the last we're going to use is the moon. We're going to take these 2 circles again because I want you to see how you can cut out multiple circles and get multiple different shapes. And I'm going to align these to the bottom. And then I'm going to go back to my Pathfinder and I'm going to do exclude. Now, what exclude does is it takes away whatever's overlapped, kind of like the football, but now I have multiple objects. So now I can double click because these are grouped together and I can go into what's called isolation mode, which means I can manipulate these individually and I can delete that one without deleting the other. If I just were to click, and I'll show you what I mean. If I were to click on both and delete, it's going to delete both. By going into the isolation mode, I can delete just the one and I can get a moon. You can choose whether your moon is left cut out or right cut out. That's completely up to you. But that's just a really kind of fun introduction to Pathfinder and the Align panel. Again, I have a more longer version of these on my website, on my YouTube channel. You may want to take a few minutes if you have time and you're ahead, is play with the Pathfinder options, the trim, the divide. These are kind of neat. I'll show you. Let me go back. These I like, for example, with the divide. If I want to cut things into pieces and not remove anything, I can now have everything pieced, which is nice. Same with the trim, except for rather than in pieces, it's going to cut out the top piece separated from the back piece, and then you can delete as you will. So lots of cool choices when using the Pathfinder, and it's just a good panel to be aware of. It's definitely on the certification exam, so you want to make sure your students master it. All right, let's work on this and then I'm going to go on to my extra stuff in case you want to learn more. All right, if you want to learn one other additional skill that I always teach my students early on, it is the Shape Builder tool. It is hands down, probably my favorite tool in Illustrator because of how versatile it is. It does a lot of things that the Pathfinder does, but I feel as if it's way, way, way more efficient than the Pathfinder panel. Now, certification really prefers the Pathfinder tool, or the Pathfinder panel, excuse me. Don't ask me why, but when I think the shape builder is a way better tool. But I want to teach you how to use it. I want to teach you some basics of it. We've got a couple of exercises here. And as you guessed it, I have a longer, more detailed version on my website and on my YouTube channel. So I'm going to show you how to draw a heart. My favorite kind of heart is I'm going to start with a circle here, and I'm going to flip this to solid just so you can see a little bit more easily. And I'm going to take that anchor point tool that we kind of discussed early on, and now we're going to actually use it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my bottom anchor point here, and I'm going to click on this bottom anchor point singularly one time. And what that's going to do is it's going to remove the handles and make it into a corner point. And if I take my direct select tool, again, click on that singular point and pull that down to like a teardrop shape. There also, we've learned to draw a teardrop, a raindrop, a different kind of petal on a flower, things like that. You are starting to see that we're going to start creating the pieces of our heart. I'm going to right click and I'm going to say transform, and I'm going to say rotate, and I'm going to choose 320 degrees to get my heart on an angle. This is also a good skill. I like to bury extra skills, if you will, with my students' work that they don't even realize they're learning new things, like how to use the rotate panel, how to then we're going to transform, we're going to reflect. I'm going to make a vertical copy of my heart. You want to make sure that you're on the selection tool, by the way, and not the direct select when you do it. This is always fun for me when students do this by accident, is they go and they transform and they reflect. And then what happens is they get like a really weird copy. So you want to make sure that they are always kind of going back to that selection tool, that default tool, if you will. I always think of it as like returning to home plate. So we want to kind of get there in that habit of always returning. So then I'm going to take my second one. I'm going to grab both of these and I'm going to arrange to top so they're nice and even. And you'll see I kind of moved that over. How wide your heart is completely up to you. I like a fat heart personally, but that's just a design preference. And now we're going to get into the tool. The tool is Shape Builder. It is Shift M on your keyboard, or it's right here on your toolbar, Shift M. I always like that you can hover over and it'll tell you what a tool is called. I always have my students label all of the icons in the program when we're learning the interface, because I think it's important for them to be able to identify these quickly. And then I give them always like a little shorty cut kind of list, if you will. It sits on their computer screens. It's something I've made with all the ones that I think are most important, and it includes this one. So if you like it a little thinner, you can always adjust, your shapes as you will. And we're going to activate that Shift Builder. Now, I'm going to go through some basics real quick about the Shape Builder tool. What it does is it allows you to take these two shapes and you can click individually. And then now it's a separate piece, which is again kind of like that Pathfinder. You can select while holding down the Option key, and you'll see it's a little negative, and I can remove pieces, which is what we're going to do for this. But one thing that I don't like right now, which we're going to fix, is that if I go in here, everything's still separate and I want them to be one shape. So we're going to use what's called scribble actions. Scribble actions exist in the Shaper tool and the Shape Builder tool. So it is something good to teach them as well. So Shift M, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag using this tool, and I realize that's kind of hard to see. So let me fix these to a lighter color so you can actually see my scribble actions. There we go. That's obnoxiously lighter. There we go. And I'm going to scribble, there you go, in between. And as I scribble into them, they're going to merge, and all of them are going to be highlighted so that when I release, it's going to unite into one singular shape. So no separate shapes, and it lets you create very complicated shapes. And I've written all that out for you very specifically. Down here, I've given you some extra shapes to practice with, and I'm going to do the speech bubble real quick so you can see. I'm always going to start by selecting all of the objects that I wish to use my shape builder tool on. Again, Shift M. And for this, I'm going to make my little speech bubble here, and then I'm going to cut out some pieces that I don't need. This is really classic. If you follow any kind of Instagram or Facebook things about logo creations, you see them doing these multiple shapes like this and cutting out pieces. They are always using the shape builder tool, I promise. So definitely one, if you have students that are really getting into graphic art, this is a tool that they need to have in their repertoire. So I'm going to start by scribble actioning the speech bubble and getting that little kind of tail, if you will. And then I'm going to hold down my Option key. Now, just like I could remove the pieces by clicking with the Option key, I can also scribble off my pieces as well. Now, I did this on purpose because I want you to see it left a little kind of extra thing here. So that's an easy fix as well. You just have to zoom in, go back to your shape builder, and just hover over that little piece to get rid of it. I always do that as a little bit of a challenge to see if my students are paying attention. Batman works essentially the same way. I'm going to let you practice that one on your own, though I do have a, again, more detailed version and a longer version on my website and on YouTube. The other extra thing I've offered for you is a little extra pen tool practice if you want some extra kind of practice with these. I always think it's a good idea to challenge yourself. There's also a game called Bezier Curve, which allows you to kind of practice a little bit more. Though I don't particularly love the way it works because it doesn't quite work the same way, in my opinion, as the pen tool does. And again, I'm folding out that handle. So it's one of those, if you want some, if students get ahead and they need something else to practice, that's one of those where they can practice that game. Now, I have extra practice sheets like this always for my students because I don't like free time. I'm not a believer in it. And then one of the other things is you see I'm messing up, and that's completely fine to mess up. I always will go back and fix later. Oh, this is something I don't think I talked about, and I'm going to show you real quick. If I'm clicking here, so I'm going to click and I'm going to pull a slight curve here because that flower stem is a little curved. I've got a handle. If I come back and singularly click on that anchor point, it's going to remove just half of the handle and let me pull a straight line moving forward, which I think is very useful. Again, don't forget that the Alt key allows you to change the direction of your handle. And if you see, if it doesn't quite line up, that's no big deal. You can always go back and fix it later. Now I'm putting in too many anchor points right here, but that's okay because I'm just kind of playing. So see, I messed up here. I can come back in, adjust the handles at my will. While I'm even drawing, I can take this one away by using my negative keyboard shortcut for the pen tool. I can kind of pull and adjust these. And if I want to start back in, no big deal. All I have to do is go back to my pen tool, and then I'm just going to kind of keep going. Oop. I click kind of back on that anchor point that I was on, and I continue on. I always watch students do this, and I always tell them not to, and every time it does not matter how many times I tell them, do not start over just because it doesn't look perfect your first time out. It is okay to draw it jacked up, and I show them that I draw mine jacked up, and I kind of draw them jacked up on purpose so that then I can show them, okay, all I'm going to do is go back with my direct select tool, and I'm going to change those handles. I'm going to adjust those angles individually, holding down the Alt key when I need to, so that I can individually change those points and I can get it perfect if I am so inclined to get it perfect, because perfection, as we all know, is completely overrated. But I do kind of always tell them it is okay to go back and make adjustments. If anything, you should make adjustments. If you get it perfect on the first time drawing something like this and you're a student in my class, then I need to sit down and you need to take over my job. It doesn't happen very often, but they're always really proud when they get it occasionally, and they nail it the first time out the gate. So again, I'm jacking this one up, but that's okay. It is okay to kind of sit here and practice and keep trying and keep manipulating as long as you keep working on the skill. That's what I think is most important is practice, practice, practice. And I tell them that. I don't care about perfection. I care about that you're practicing the skill. Hopefully this has been really helpful for you. You've enjoyed the worksheets. Again, I have way more. This was just a getting started, an introduction, if you will, into Adobe Illustrator. Can't wait to see what you draw. Feel free to shoot me a line. Thanks so much for joining me, and we'll see you next time. Subscribe and like the channel, by the way.